All right, a Zoom just told me on there. Let's get this thing started here. We've got a packed audience here for this very exciting webinar that we've got on our MSP Success webinar series. I'm Jeff Johnson, president of MSP Success Magazine and Big Red Media here as well. This is a popular topic, and I'm really excited to have Eddie and Brian on with us, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment here. Just a few quick items on this is that one is that we've got a couple hundred MSPs that are all on this call here today. And so if you do have questions, then make sure that you use the Q&A. It's going to be the easiest for us with so many people on this webinar today. If you have questions that are popping in, Brian, Eddie, Courtney in the background, myself, we're all going to be watching those questions. And so hopefully we've got some time at the end of this to be able to get those questions answered that you have. We'll do our best to be able to get all of those answered. If you just want to give a shout out, say where you're at, any of that type of stuff, feel free to use the chat. So if you want to say of where you're at, I know I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee here. If you want to say of where you're dialed into this webinar from, go ahead and use the chat for that. But really with this, I want to get straight into the content on this. We've got two former MSPs. And I think the big thing on this is looking at it is specifically around being able to use a tabletop exercise to be able to build this out for you. And I'm seeing people posting in the chat now where they're at. I'm seeing Charleston, South Carolina, though, Davenport, Washington, and more with it. Looking at this for you guys, for two MSPs, you're working with hundreds, if not thousands of MSPs right now. I know both of you have a ton of experience. Brian, you've been around for 20 years. Eddie, you had your MSP for many, many years before selling it last year here. And so a lot to be able to share on this of it. So make sure that you guys have your pen and paper ready to be able to take notes on this. And guys, Brian, Eddie, I'm going to turn it over to you guys because I know you got a lot to cover today.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. It's a sunnier, brighter day when I know I get to get on a webinar and talk to Jeff. So thanks a lot, Jeff. This is really, really awesome.
Thanks, Eddie.
So let's get rolling here. Actually, Brian, you want to just elaborate on yourself, and I'll share our slides.
Absolutely.
First.
So while Eddie's pulling up those slides, I want to touch on a couple things here. I'll talk a little bit about my background. So as Jeff said, I've been in the MSP industry for over 20 years now. I've gone in and out. I've worked on the corporate side. I've owned two of my own MSPs very successfully. I've also been a VAR and reseller. This is my first foray into the vendor side of things. And I can't tell you how excited I am because my last go around, I opened about 40 MSPs across the US in 3 years. Really exciting, really fun to do. But now Eddie and I get to work with, kind of like Jeff touched on, thousands of MSPs. Our goal really is to help them grow and help them change their business. So bringing the expertise from everything from the corporate level down to SMB, that's what we're here to do. And I am really excited to do that today. So Eddie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Great, thanks a lot, BK. So, BK and Jeff both talked about the fact that I previously owned an MSP, actually two MSPs, but prior to that, my roots were in the enterprise. I worked for a company called, you may have heard of it, EDS and HP, before I decided that I wanted a more intimate relationship with the people I was working with. I thought, I was a pretty good analyst and a damn good IT infrastructure analysts. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to start an MSP. And so I learned everything the hard way. I had zero clue about, finance and marketing. I was very strong technically. And from that point of view, my clients did very, very well. But from a business perspective, it was really tough. And so it was a long haul for me. And then I ended up getting a lot smarter, ended up reading a book called, actually a couple of really great books, The E-Myth, that's what it was called. And it actually saved my business and helped me really restructure and understand how to position my business and turned it around, ended up merging with another MSP later on and ran that one successfully until, again, I just sold it last year. So yeah, I'm in the same boat as Brian. You know, I always joke that, you know, it's interesting now that I flipped to the dark side. I mean, the vendor side. It is so strange, but it's also so amazing to see and to help MSPs grow and to help see them invest in security and, you know, and see them invest in new sales strategies. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is that merger of security strategy and turning it into a sales vehicle, right? And so I'm super excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
So one of the things I'll touch on really quick as we get started, Eddie and I, for people who present on a very regular basis, we hate slide decks. We are not fans of slide decks. So I can tell you, we've got some slides here, but a lot of what we're going to do today is really some back and forth banter. We want to share some things with you. We want to tell you some stories. We want you to walk away with this with something tangible. We want to feel like you've learned something and take something from this that you can implement into your business. So just know we've got some slides, but we are going to absolutely spend way more time talking than slide decking you to death. So just know that that's how we roll. We want to share stories with you and have a good time.
You're going to get a glimpse of what it looks like for BK and I to talk behind the scenes and the types of conversations that we have. So this is going to be fairly casual. We do have some really, powerful points that we want to make sure we get the communication across, but you're definitely going to, see a lot of back and forth conversation. And so really to set the stage for this whole thing, I talked about that book, The E-Myth, and this is my favorite quote out of it. And it's simply put, your job is to prepare yourself and your business for growth. And it's been tough, right? I mean, as an MSP, 10 years ago, our stack looked like about half a dozen items, right? You had your firewall, maybe some sort of email security, your desktop endpoint security, such as it was, which is basically, antivirus with signatures. You had, of course, I mentioned your firewall, and then basic, projects and tickets and that sort of thing. And that was really the extent of what it looked like to run an IT company or an MSP. But suddenly, over the last 10, 12 years, our stack has exploded. And so we've all had to learn the hard way. In some cases, I'm going to tell a couple of stories today about, some of the times that we got beat up because of stuff that happened within our MSP and how we learned the hard way. And so what we're hoping to do throughout this today is to not just today, but this is kind of the whole point of BK and I joining Malwarebytes, is so that we can help give that insight. We can help give that guidance and educate and, provide more than just that vendor relationship where, you get a great product, you get great support, but also the added value and the added wisdom that comes with a company that is bigger than the sum of its parts when it begins to feed an MSP the things that they need. And not, as much as it's important to have that great product, these days you just need more than that.
I'll touch on something there. I think it was October of last year. I was at an event. There were 192 vendors at that event. It was a large event. So I can see that there's this vendor fatigue that is really just starting to form. And we all know the process because we've all been there. It's you go to the show, you get overwhelmed. Everyone says that they can do it better. But all they're looking for is sign the partner application, buy our product or switch over to our product. And then you're kind of just left there holding the bag, hoping for the best. All right. That is not what we want to do here. Eddie and I were very agnostic. All right. You're going to see that in our presentation today, because we're actually going to talk about a lot of stuff that actually has nothing to do with what Eddie and I do on a daily basis. So what we're really here to do is provide thought leadership to bring you guys additional tools, content, and things that will actually help you grow your business and help you make informed decisions when it comes to building your stack. And that's where we want to help.
Awesome. All right, let's kick this off. So what we're going to do today is we're going to frame a few points that are going to get us to where we begin to talk about, how to sell and what's the word I'm looking for? I guess really help your clients experience and understand the the pain and the suffering that comes along with an event, right? And to help them understand that it isn't really, and it's not about, and I hate selling on FUD, on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but we want to talk about preparedness. And what I love to talk about here is selling your pain. And I don't mean selling your client's pain. I don't mean selling your vendor's pain. I mean selling you as an MSP, your pain, and help them understand what it's like. So we had when I own my MSP, you have to forgive me. A lot of times I begin to do these presentations, I begin to say we, not like we as a vendor, but we as MSPs, because I have a hard time taking that MSP hat off. But anyway, so we had a client as an MSP that called us up. I'm sorry, they weren't a client yet. They were a local business that was very well known. They weren't a client at the time, and they called us up and said, "Hey, look, no, we're having a big problem here. We can't get any of our data." And so at the time I was doing, sales and marketing for my MSP. And so I ran down there and because I wanted to connect with the owner of this company. And I got in there and they kind of walked me through the problems that were happening. And I walked into their quote unquote server room, and it was an absolute disaster. It wasn't even really a server room. It was a small utility room off their lunchroom with a broken door. And so as I dug into the issue that they were having, I realized that, their hard drives, they had a RAID set up, but 2 hard drives had failed. They lost all their data. We dug into it, and it turned out to be quite the disaster. First off, they were a custom manufacturing company that relied completely on the data that they collected from their clients, stored on their server in order to perform projects. So these guys were down and out. And so they ran, it took, by the time we were able to dig up some 2-month-old backups from the back of this dusty room, rebuild their server, get them back online, it was almost a week by the time we were able to get all the parts. And then even then it was at least a week and a half of rework and downtime and communication with clients. And so we sat back at the end of this. They didn't reveal all of their numbers, but we kind of figured we knew what the impact was based on the fact they had 12 office staff and about 20 people working in the manufacturing area, and it was well into the 6 digits of what this cost them. And you can imagine the pain and the frustration that came with that CEO to have to communicate with those clients, have to communicate with their staff that were first of all frustrated for the rework, but also frustrated for their clients. And so it was a big deal. And I'll tell you what, there's a longer version of this conversation and the story that I tell. And you know what? I've told that story hundreds of times, but you know who I tell it to is I would tell it to potential clients. I would tell the story about a business that wasn't a client of ours, that went through this pain and suffering. You know what? And when you're a business owner and you start to hear about the pain and suffering because of a particular instance or a particular event that happens, it puts you on your edge of your seat. You sit up a little straighter and you begin to listen, because we all feel, especially if you're the MSP owner, we're all in this together. We're all entrepreneurs. We all understand we want the most for our business. So when we start to share those experiences, we begin to tap into something more emotional, right? And then that's how we get their attention. And that's where we can really begin, the education and the preparation, to properly help our clients.
Awesome.
And
Thanks,
so
Eddie.
clearly identify. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've got a story I can jump in there really quick with.
Sure.
So similar scenario. I had a new potential mid-market customer that came to us, and we're looking at a few things. We put some quotes in front of them. They came back to us about a week and a half later. I got a call, I think it was 7:30 at night, and it was the owner, and he said, "I'm in an emergency situation. I need to know if you guys can help me." We went in and realized they had a massive hardware failure. So their SAN had gone down, server had gone down, major failures. Now, there were a lot of things wrong here. They had old hardware, but they had an IT director. They had two people on staff. And so this is one of the magic things about MSP that I like. Well, I loved being anything and everything for my clients. Some of my best clients were clients where I wanted to supplement their support with some of this low-hanging fruit. So the first thing we did was we said, let's go to the backups. All right, let's see what we can recover. At the end of the day, we were only able to recover about 60% of the data. But here's why. We realized the IT director and the sysadmin all they saw was a Symantec backup exec portal that they had inherited when they came on. And they just saw green checkboxes that said backup was successful. Here's what they didn't realize. The backups were not actually backing up all of the repositories, all of the servers, and all of the places that should have been backed up. No one was reviewing it. No one was checking it. And again, keep in mind, these customers, they're under a lot of stress to manage a lot of things. And a lot of times they get hired to do just support. So I think the role of the MSP is shifting. We need to shift from being just support for our customers to truly being proactive advisors to our customers, because we do know better. Okay, we would have found stuff like that in a proper onboarding. We would have dug into that deeper. We would have asked those questions. So again, like Eddie's talking about, selling on the pain, showing where we can help and fix, all right, and where we can supplement and just back up. IT directors, sysadmins, CTOs, some of them were my best customers because we went in and took over the day-to-day stuff that they just weren't supporting well. So go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, no, absolutely great. Absolutely great. Now, something else I like to do as part of this, or what I used to do as part of this, was sprinkle in the quotes, just to give a ballpark estimate. Depending on the size of the company, it could be as little as, a few hundred, or at least certainly under $1,000 for a smaller company to have, a decent backup that happens where you get backup verification, and putting that into, building that right into the narrative when you talk to a customer helps them understand that when you do finally come down to that quote, that they're understanding, how that feeds into the actual value of what you're offering. All right. All right, number 2, leveling up your business. Helping customers realize the full benefit of your server. Sorry, I can't help. I always have to comment. I love this picture.
Yeah.
In case the cyber attack, great glass and pull cables. And here's why I love it. I always have to call it out because most people laugh at it. Yeah, it's cute and everything. But when it comes to incident response planning, it's actually not a bad start. A, it's written down, and B, it's available offline. So if you only start with this as an incident response plan, at least you're ahead of a lot of companies out there. Anyway, sorry, just my aside there. But experience is the best teacher. And so we're going to talk about the disaster recovery simulation. We're going to talk about, how a tabletop exercise feeds into it. And so if I could just start off with a quick story. When we decided at my MSP, when we decided to start doing the tabletop exercises, there was a lot of work that went into it. There was also a lot of, because at this point I had a couple of partners, and there was a lot of back and forth because there was a lot of effort to prepare for it. It takes a lot of time in convincing the owners and the decision makers to be involved. If I were to talk about who should be involved right away, but here's what happened. When we did 2 things, we did a disaster recovery simulation and we did the tabletop exercises. When we did a disaster recovery simulation, we worked with one of our manufacturers, and once a year we would set aside a day, and we began to eventually just build this right into our backup and disaster recovery offering, that we would build in the labor to do this because it was fairly intensive. And so this particular year, we decided that we would do a server failure simulation, hardware failure. And so we said the time and the day, everyone was prepared for it. We sent the signal through our RMM to kill the server. And then we kicked it into gear. We did a simulation phone call where they would respond, they'd call us up, we'd go create the ticket, we'd step through it. And the very first time we did this was an absolute, no pun intended, I guess, was an absolute disaster, to be clear. And that wasn't because we couldn't recover. It wasn't because, we weren't prepared from a process perspective, but the client wasn't really ready for the amount of time it would take. They weren't really ready with how they would communicate it to their staff and that sort of thing. But the biggest impact was certainly they wanted to be back online in about 4 hours. It took us 6 to 8. And so part of what we did, and we're going to talk about this too, was the lessons learned, where we met afterwards and they sat down and said, look, this is not acceptable. We need to be up, at this X amount of time. And this wasn't because we didn't talk about the requirements for the customer, but they thought that, they were kind of wishy-washy about how much time they needed, the recovery point, recovery time objective. They were pretty loose about it, but when they actually experienced it, it really helped them understand what they needed as a business. And out of that, we ended up, upgrading their backup system. We ended up upgrading their on-site appliance. And so while it was an experience to understand and a process to play through, it also fed in to more revenue, better sales, better protection for the client. Anything else you want to cover on that, Brian? Or should we jump right into it?
No, this is great because there's some things I want to talk about here, but I think they align really well with the tabletop. So once we get to our tabletop, I think we've got some stories I want to weave in right in there.
Excellent. Let's do it. So first off, maybe I should define what a tabletop exercise is.
Yes.
I know a lot of times tabletop exercise is typically talked about within the red team type of companies or type of offerings, but it's such a valuable tool. So tabletop exercise, anybody has played a role-playing game, right? Dungeons and Dragons, there's been tons and tons of them over the years. It's essentially what you're doing. I mean, less the dice and less the character creation, but you need the stakeholders, you need the proper people in place. And essentially what you're doing is you're running through a scenario. You're gonna lay the foundation. So for example, the scenario that we're going to talk about today is ransomware infection. So you sit down and you talk about, okay, look, here's the scenario, here's what's happening, here's the impact, and you begin to play it out. And with all the right players in the room, you should be able to get to a point where you begin to identify the holes. All right, so that's the whole idea, and then to patch them later on. So that's what a definition of a tabletop exercise is, and the whole point of it.
So let's touch on number 2 here. So including the key stakeholders. This is probably the most critical piece of this. Here's the reason why. At this stage in the game, this is where you define and determine who's involved when dealing with an incident, right? And also, you get kind of that feedback from everyone because the office manager may feel, hey, we can be up in 6 to 8 hours, but you get ownership involved. Ownership may come back and say, we need to be up in 4, like Eddie was talking about. All right. Having everyone in alignment here is critical. The other thing too is primary customer contacts, right? I can't tell you how many times when we were dealing with an incident, we struggled to get a hold of the customer. They're the ones experiencing the incident, and we can't get a hold of our primary contact. We're struggling to coordinate. When we need to isolate something or make a drastic adjustment that's going to potentially affect their business in a very immediate way, you want to communicate with them versus, hey, by the way, we just shut off half your business. All right. The communication here is key. We'll talk about this a little more as we dive in, but I'll tell you what, I work with a ton of other MSPs. I've done this with customers for years. I've typically never, ever had a customer fire us because an incident happened. Because here's the truth, you can't control all incidents. But I've definitely had a customer fire us when we poorly communicated about the incident. All right, the communication around the incident is key. And as we step a little deeper into this, I'm going to talk a little bit about sometimes why we don't communicate so well on these incidents. But go ahead, Eddie.
Very good. So I'm going to go, this kind of takes feet. That's a perfect segue there, BK. So it's going to take us to the step 3, stepping through the process. And so things like who should be notified and when, setting the initial expectations. And BK touched on something really, really valuable. It almost helps out to have more than you would expect. In most cases, I would never recommend overstaffing a meeting. But when it comes to tabletop exercises, it's often valuable to have more people than you might expect. So for example, we did a tabletop exercise with a client one time where they were a transportation company, and they had their main office in one town, and they had a second office in a remote village. and there was no cell phone service. And so the table exercise was very simple. I think it was one of the first ones, just to keep it nice and clean, was power outage. And so when there's a power outage, obviously there's, they had an internal server, wasn't going to be available. They hosted some sort of internal app. Okay, well, we need to contact the remote office. Well, if that remote office has a power outage, there's no cell phone service. They use VoIP. How are they going to get a hold of them? So things like that, they had to work around. So having more people than necessary in the beginning, at least, until you begin to really get a feel for how these work, it can be very, very valuable. And so
Cool.
I know BK, let's kind of walk through these a little bit. So here's how it works. So if I'm the MSP and I'm sitting down, BK, if you want to play the client,
Absolutely.
it really comes down to you as the MSP taking control, of the meeting. This is something that you are moderating, but you're empowering the client to tell you what they need, not necessarily you telling them what they need, right? So we need to be careful around, making assumptions on the type of technology, solutions to put in place. Let's first talk about, what that client needs. So things like, hey, Mr. Client, first off, when we have, if we were to have, a ransomware attack and everything should be down, who are the first people you need to notify? What are the impacts to you and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what I would typically say, and what we see a lot, is they're going to say, I need my office manager to be contacted. The first question that the office manager is going to ask is, how fast am I going to be back up? All right, that question is going to come right out of the gate. So what we want to be prepared with, and this is why we build incident response plans, one of the things that comes with that is, should my office manager be ready to send out our incident template to our clients? Because that could be, an email that gets sent out from the cloud. That could be, depending on VoIP or not, it could be a phone tree. Maybe they have to use cell phones, whatever it may be. But as a client, they start to feel better once they understand the steps. Okay, great. So I need you to reach out to my office manager. I need to understand an ETA and what the impact is. And, hey, if the recovery is less than 2 hours, I'm going to say, we don't have to notify our clients. If you think it's going to be more than 4 hours, maybe we do. And Eddie, can you and your team help us do that if we've lost access, internally, things like that.
Oh man, okay. So that is just the best answer you could have given, BK, because what happens when your client says something like that, if you really begin to pay attention to what they're saying, it's going to blow your mind, because there's so much to unpack out of that, right? If you're familiar with recovery time objective and recovery point objective is how much data can they lose? How often should your backups be occurring? Can they lose the full day? Like, what happens if they get hit by ransomware an hour before their backup runs and you only run them once a day? Can they afford to lose all of that data? Recovery time objective, BK just mentioned, the first question out of their mouth was, how long are we going to be down for? And so when you begin to dig into each of the key personnel and their answers, what you can do is you begin to paint a picture, and so that picture begins to put together what you need to do as an MSP. And what the best part of that is, I'm kind of stealing my own thunder for the end here, but the best part of that is you begin to paint that picture, and when you put the solution together to meet that, when you go to the client, they have just given you the justification for the solutions you're about to offer them, right? I mean, they've answered the questions. They've given you the mandate to deliver X. And so when you can deliver X, it makes it a lot easier for them to understand, why they're paying out what they're paying and the value that they're going to get out of it.
Awesome. One of the things we should touch on there on the MSP side, Eddie, just for the very beginning, I know you and I, we actually had a chat about this the other day, which I thought was really beneficial, is inherently technicians, especially, all right, once they see the incident happened, once they know that ransomware is hit, data is encrypted, and that this morning is going to be a bad day for some people, they're not so quick to want to pick up the phone. They don't necessarily want to make the notification. Again, from a technical perspective, my background too, I'm a network engineer, right? I've seen outages. I've dealt with all of this many times. Sometimes there's that innate, like, if I wait long enough, maybe I can fix some of this before I have to tell them what happened. All right. And that's a bad idea. It's a bad plan. The communication needs to be very upfront. So I just wanted to touch on that sometimes there's this innate fixer inside of us that just goes, man, if I just work on this really hard for the next hour, I might not have to give them bad news.
Oh yeah, that is phenomenal. And so that's great. Actually, it's a great comment because it's really going to put a microscope on your own processes, your internal process. So some of the questions here become MSP focused after we've talked about the impact, after we've talked about what the client needs. But things like understanding where it came from. What is your internal process? What keeps that one technician from digging in and getting over its head and not triggering off that incident response plan? So while this is a great conversation, when you first begin these and the first couple that you do, it's going to be an eye opener, not only for your clients, but for you and your internal MSP process as well.
Well, and I'm sure Eddie's going to probably touch on this a little bit too, but we like to preach things like least privilege access, stuff like that. Well, we start to get into some of these bullet points again. So like, how do you continue to operate? That's one that I love to answer because this ties into impact. If you're running least privilege access, so let's say, okay, I'm going to be super fair. The two departments that get hit the most, guys, all right, it's finance and HR. It just is. Like, it happens constantly. We can't avoid it. The resumes and the Excel spreadsheets, they're just yucky. Okay. So if that financial person only has access to the folders that they need access to do business, there's a lot of times where we can really limit the impact. When that question comes up, how do we continue to operate? Well, guess what? If we've only impacted 3 people in your organization and 1 folder, guess what? Business keeps moving on. We deal with this isolated incident, obviously make sure that it's truly isolated, but we get to have a lot of control. This is where, when it comes to selling, guys, this is where we can sell them on, the more proactive you let us be, the more advice you take on how we really can help you operate your business effectively and securely, we can reduce your risk and your impact down the road exponentially, which ultimately saves them time plus money, which makes customers happy. And I'll be fair, guys, it saves us time and money. As an MSP, the way I made my money was by creating efficiency. The more efficient that I am in my day-to-day business, the more money I made, the less overtime I paid to my guys. So again, these are opportunities when we do this tabletop, when we build the incident response plan. These are opportunities for us to break this out. This isn't a slamming session. This isn't us putting down how they do business. This is us openly showing them, hey, you know what? We noticed that your accounting manager has access to like 75% of the file shares that you run as a company. Do they really need access to all of that? Or could we potentially tighten this up and reduce some of your risk?
And I think a lot of that will come through as an MSP matures. And I don't mean that disparagingly. Like when I first started my MSP, quite honestly, I quit my day job to start my MSP, and I did everything that I had to do in order to pay my mortgage. Right? I mean, we did everything from web development. I even did some application development at the beginning. We did break fix. before I finally realized that, I just wasn't making any money. First off, my revenue would, pretty much matched my expenses. And so, we had to transition into a managed service provider. And then, even then, we constantly looked for better ways to, not only become more, I mean, it really was being efficient, but I think that a lot of MSPs, especially if you're an MSP that, you start off as that one-man shop and you grew into it, you get to a point where you understand and you want to do what's, I don't want to say what's easy. I want to say what's less drama, right? You, as much as you want to sympathize with a small company that's also struggling and may not want to implement all of, the security features that they should, I have, you begin to realize and recognize that when you set that bar of security, you have to get to that point where you're setting it at a certain level. And if a company comes in below that, it's honestly, time for education. It's time to show them the value. But if they still don't buy into it, they're just simply not a fit. And I found as years went by, we got better and better at that. And so just exactly what BK was saying, that finding those efficiencies, and sometimes that's the way, right? We're talking about the tabletop exercises today, and that is certainly a sign of a mature MSP that engages with their client in that way. Sorry, we kind of went down a rabbit hole, but just to steer us back in, documenting the steps. So now that you've gone through that process, and let's assume that you've done a couple of these already. You've worked on those internal processes, like how you're going to recover. That you've put a proper, in this case, if it's ransomware, you've put in proper measures to begin to make sure that you're preventing it when you can, recovering it when you can't. As you begin to work with more and more clients and put them through more and more situations, having those lessons learned meetings afterwards and talking about the surprises, right? You're going to find that the surprises are going to come more on your client side as you become more mature, as you become more familiar, and as you begin to flesh out your stack and the processes and partner with great vendors. The lessons learned is going to be on their side. And that it does become a lot of fun. I really, really enjoy this. Is one of the best part of my jobs is doing these tabletop exercises, because I began to understand my client's business better. They began to recognize that I cared about it better. And at the end of the day, having that bar I just mentioned about where your security is becomes not even a thought, right? It becomes, now that your client is asking you to make sure that they can survive through one of these disasters.
One of the things
So
that he touched on,
go ahead.
one of the things that he touched on there, and I think that's a critical point. So one of my favorite books, it's by Simon Sinek. It's called Start With Why. I recommend everyone reads it. It's a great book, especially just to help find yourself. I think it's a personal development and professional development book. It's really great. So this goes back to, everyone wants to make a dollar. Everyone wants to make a living. But if you can, at the root of your business, find out why you want to help these customers. Eddie hit a great point. When I started sitting down with businesses and got out of my head being so focused on, I've got to make sure that they've got backup, they've got AV, they've got their firewall, everything's turned on, I've got my boxes checked and I've done this. Well, do you need to check boxes? Yes. Do you need to cover your bases and everything? Sure. But I started listening to the pain points of their business and realized through productivity tools and other vendors, I could create cost consolidation for them. I could do different things that would actually help them in their day-to-day business. Taking other products, simple stuff like teaching people how to use OneDrive and SharePoint or stuff like that. It seems small, but I was able to help people save money every month. I was able to help people take their workforces remote and help them increase their bottom line. So I wasn't just providing the service, providing the tools. I was helping people with their business. And as a business owner, I was able to relate to them, and I really appreciated, that help, because I will say along the way, Eddie, I'm sure you did too, I learned a lot of lessons along the way from a lot of other very mature business owners, entrepreneurs, and people who helped me make changes in my business as well. So taking that shift from the product focus and checking the boxes and doing the things you need to, which you should, sitting down and doing these and listening, I learned a lot more about their business, and I was able to help them on a level that I can tell you most other vendors and service providers were not helping them with. So huge, huge differentiator right there, if you can take the time and listen.
Awesome. All right, very good. Some people might be asking right now, okay, this is great and all, but how do I do these? Where do I find them? First off, ChatGPT is a wonderful resource for getting these, but the state of Washington actually offers documented tabletop exercises. I put the URL at the bottom if you want to grab that.
Yep.
I think there's at least 24 different scenarios there. It's all formatted nicely in PDF, gives you the questions, gives you the scenarios, and certainly modify them to whatever meets or is applicable to you and your clients. All right, let's keep on going here. Awesome. So number 3, and this is kind of just to round out that education piece, and to also round out the empathy piece. If you haven't picked it up already, BK and I both come from the same school of thought where he touched on the why, and certainly our why is to then as MSP owners, our why was to see our clients excel. Now our why is certainly to see MSPs excel and to make sure that they are have the tools and have the support that they need. And so this is another, I mentioned tabletop exercises was a phenomenal part of my job, but so is this. Something that I had established in the last few years with my MSP was cybersecurity awareness training. And I'm not talking about the simulated phishing with the training, although that has its place. What we called cybersecurity awareness training was the opportunity for me to go in front of all of my clients' staff and first of all, be present. If I could do them live in person, I would. So if I sometimes, obviously through a pandemic that seems to happen, or just strictly remote offices, I couldn't do it. But it wasn't really complex because it was targeted at everybody from, the clerk to the CEO to the laborer in a manufacturer. It was the bar was low when it came to the technical topics I talked about. It was more about, hey, this is what we're seeing. A lot of it, really, quite honestly, a lot of it was around social engineering. But then we'd also take that opportunity to, do a bit of a humble brag about what we were doing in the background for that client, so that they understood that that every employee understood, not just the decision makers and the owners that we dealt with on a continual basis, but that everybody in that room understood what we were doing, how it works, the progression, the understanding that cyber threats and being cyber secure is not a checkbox, it's a journey. And I think the biggest value around there, certainly that they all had to learn. Certainly we all we had to teach them about social engineering. We had to teach them about the CEO scam and the gift card scam and all that fun stuff. But I think the biggest value there was that, who am I talking to that's in that meeting, right? I'm talking to the future managers, the future decision makers, the future C-level. And so when they get into those positions and they get there, they're already educated on the fact that, hey, you know what, Mr. MSP, you just came to us, 6 months ago to sell us, EDR, and now you're coming and you're talking to us about MDR and DNS filtering and patch man. I thought we were security. Well, you'll never have that conversation if you begin that education, holistically with the company.
Sorry, Eddie.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, BK.
I generated so many projects from QBRs, tabletop exercises, and reviewing incident plans. And the truth is this, and Eddie's absolutely right. Sometimes the customer will get frustrated. You just told me that I needed this, all right? We all know this. There's no silver bullet to cybersecurity. And here's the real answer. I'll give you the answer. The hackers, the bad actors, those guys out there, the threats, guess what? They are constantly changing and evolving, and they're coming after you and your business. So what are we doing on our side? We are adapting, we're changing, we're shifting. And really, as MSPs, when we bring this new stuff to the table, it's not a sales tactic. This is not, hey, I'm trying to just bump up my monthly revenue. It's, hey, I found another new way that I can effectively help make sure your business stays secure. So absolutely, I'm going to bring this to the surface. I want to talk about it. Let's go through this and see where it can help. And I'll be fair, sometimes we get new tools that make other tools obsolete. So just know that sometimes this turns back into cost consolidation. Hey, I brought 2 new tools to the table, but that old tool we used to use to do this, we don't need this anymore. We've actually absorbed and adopted that into this new tool. So it's not just about nickel and diming. It really is about, we are trying to change and adjust with a super crazy threat landscape out there. All right. The upside for us as MSPs, this is all over the news. It is very front facing. It's in the public eye that this is happening, that it's bad, and it's going to continue to get worse. So what we're focused on is educating. That's what we're here to do. We're here to educate. And also, like Eddie talked about, we set our bar. Look, here's the minimum for us. We need you to meet the minimum. But if you want, I've got some really great information and ways that I can help you that go above and beyond. So go ahead, Eddie.
Very good. Just looking at our time, BK, I probably have about another 20 minutes I could talk about on this topic.
Yeah,
especially when we
absolutely.
start getting into the assessments and the defensible security, but we might have to leave that point. I'll talk to Jeff. Ask
Jeff,
Jeff
you'll have
really
to have us
nicely.
back.
We
We'll
can come
do this
back and
again.
do another one of these. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So just to start to wrap it up, it really does come down to risk education. That's why you do the tabletop exercises. That's why we do the DR simulations, because the best selling tool is experience, right? How many times, and especially BK, you and I were just talking about this. How many nights did you lay awake when you weren't sure if a client was being backed up properly? How often do you really go to backups? Not really that often, but when they're not happening, man, that is stress inducing. I've been there, I've lived it, I hate it. So if we're not educating our clients on where we're coming from, what we're trying to do, we're missing a big opportunity. Okay, so we are, just to briefly touch on Malwarebytes really quickly. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on it. I really want to do some Q&A, but just for everyone that doesn't know, look, Malwarebytes, we've been around for over 15 years. You've trusted us. We get so much love at every single Big Red Media event about Malwarebytes, and they've been using us for 15 years. Most people don't know that we have an MSP platform. We've had it for over 4 years now. EDR, we've got our MDR, which is world-class, phenomenal. We've got a bunch of modules that we've released over the last couple of months, patch management, vulnerability scanning, DNS filtering. We've just come out. Oh, I'm super excited I keep meaning to talk about this, and every chance I get, we've come out with mobile protection, iOS, Android, and Chrome. So all of you MSPs that are supporting education, I know this is going to be massive for you. One dashboard to manage all of your endpoints, including mobile. Really great. Do you want to expand on anything, BK, before we go to questions?
No, this is perfect.
Awesome. All right, let's have it. Oh, if you're interested in Malwarebytes and our OneView and our MSP program, that's the URL. Come find us.
I like that, Eddie, that it was that. Oh, wait, just in case you want to opt in to learn more about the tools. You were
Yes.
so fired up about the tabletop exercise and everything else, and great on this. Had a lot of good comments on it around that. So, guys, if you do have questions, then definitely put them in the chat. Around this, do you see? I see a question that was in here. It's in the chat. I'll form it into a question. Is that do you use any certain tools for simulation and the simulation demonstration to clients on this? I know someone was asking that or had a comment in the chat. And so have you seen that as being a strategy for this from a tabletop exercises?
So from a tabletop exercise, typically speaking, and from a disaster simulation point of view, really it boils down to recreating the situation, which is typically some sort of an outage. And if you're looking for a type of like an attack simulation, then we're inching into the red team side. We're looking for maybe a penetration test. There are some tools out there. I haven't really seen too many effective automated ones. Typically, you want to start looking for a red team type of organization that would do something like that.
Now, what I'll touch on there is, again, we're specifically talking about tabletop exercises, but what we would do sometimes, and this would help, is if you're running like tools like rapid fire tools or other things out there, sometimes what we would do is we would do an assessment prior to doing kind of a QBR, incident response plan review, things like that. So sometimes we would leverage that to do a review of current setups and current statuses. Now, again, sometimes we would just feed that into why we're doing the tabletop or what we're specifically doing a tabletop on. But as far as tools, those are typically, we would run through like some assessment tools or something as a lead in for a QBR or something along those lines. And sometimes that would feed into why we're doing this. So not a requirement during it, but sometimes you could run those things and do that as you lead up to one of these.
Oh, and I do want to note here, and it is a longer, but I'll even read it off here for the recording. I know it's on the screen, the malwarebytes.com/MSP. Courtney posted it up in the chat here, malwarebytes.com/partners/managed-service-providers. That may go to the exact same link as the malwarebytes.com/MSP. I'm not sure with that, but just wanted to get it out there, especially for the recording here. What other tips? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now. So if you guys do have questions, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left in this webinar. Brian, Eddie, what other tips do you have? I know you mentioned that you could talk further. You could talk for hours on this. It's a passion of yours. We can all tell definitely on this. What other tips that would you like to provide here, since we got some time?
If you're an MSP and you haven't embraced some sort of framework, I would certainly start looking into that. Look, regulation is coming. It's looming ahead of us. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I know this is going to be a reality where MSPs are going to have to meet at some point some sort of standard. And so if you're not using something, we talk a lot about here at Malwarebytes, we talk a lot about CIS controls.
Yes.
And so we're really excited about those. I love them because they're very straightforward. First of all, CIS has done a wonderful job of breaking them down between like where you should start all the way to an enterprise or a higher maturity level. So it's easy to follow. And I find that a lot of MSPs, and I know this because I was guilty. When I told you that when I first started my MSP, I came from the enterprise. I was very good at endpoint protection because I spent a lot of time doing that. I was very good at backup and disaster recovery because guess what? That's what I did all the time. My firewall expertise was okay. I mean, I was a technical guy. I understood security. I figured it out. And so what happens is that security becomes subjective instead of objective. And what CIS controls allows you to do is wrap that objective goals around your security.
Yeah, very, very cool with that. Yeah, Courtney, go ahead. I know Courtney mentioned, I'm going to get to a question here that just popped up. Courtney just asked in the background around an upcoming webinar for this group. So Courtney just posted that up right there with it. Jim is asking, is there a script or best practices paper available for the event known and tabletop exercise? It seems to make sense, but we love following tested recipes, more like a step-by-step than a script. What's your guys' thought on that?
I'm not sure if he's referring because of those. I don't know if you looked at those templates that I sent out, but it's very good at giving a step-by-step if that's. But as far as a script goes, there's a lot of built-in questions into those.
Yeah.
If they want to reach out to me directly, I do have some resources that I didn't put into this presentation. I'll put my email address right in here. If you want to reach out to me, we can certainly connect.
Yeah.
I can't spell my own name apparently.
And again, guys, a lot of this is fluid. We can give you, templates to check out here. There's some good questions in there, but ultimately you're going to end up kind of carving something into your own. You'll end up using, honestly, lessons learned and things from your own business. And here's why that's important is I could try to tell you someone else's story, but the truth is the emotion, the honesty, and really the genuine feelings come from you guys really being able to build your own stories with your customers, with your MSPs, stuff that you've gone through. It's critical. And so you'll start to build these out out on your own. I'll also say, like in that link there that Eddie sent out, there are a ton of questions. Sometimes you'll find you don't need all of those questions. Sometimes you'll find a set of questions in an order that you feel comfortable with, because that's the other thing. You want this to become kind of second nature. You want this to be a very comfortable exercise that you and your team are very comfortable moderating and running. You don't want it to seem like, all right, I've come in with this piece of paper and the goal is we have to get through. Like that's the worst feeling you can have is we have to get through this today. All right. You want to make this fluid and you want to feel comfortable presenting it and moderating it.
Yeah. So here's how this goes for a lot of MSPs, right? They begin to do this, and you know what? You're all extremely smart people. You're all of a sudden going to say, "Oh, wait a minute! I can be very strategic about this." I'm going to give you a dead simple example, and you're not. So we had a golf course that we supported in our MSP, and they refused to do multi-factor authentication through Office 365, like flat out refused. And so when it came around, to do our QBR, we said, okay, you know what, we're gonna let's do a bit of role playing. We're gonna do a tabletop exercise, and we walk through it. So suddenly, what we began to do was we would identify weaknesses, within our clients' security, and if we had struggles, if we had those stubborn clients that we, it's built right into the title of this presentation, that's how we would help convince them. So use it strategically. You know where the weak spots are that your clients have, or you know what you're struggling to make you as part of your security bar. Focus on those. Help. We can lead the client to the trough to drink, right? I mean, the saying, you can lead a horse to a trough, but you can't make him drink. Well, guess what? If you paint the picture nice enough, if you make the water attractive enough, they're gonna drink. So that's what we need to do.
Hey, Eddie, you mentioned something about the templates. I know Roy was asking about that one. Can you just clarify on that, of the templates that you mentioned?
Oh, like the URL, or?
I don't know if it was a URL that you had posted up there.
It got posted earlier. Paul G posted it in here as well. Under, it's that cybersecurity.wa.gov.
Got it. Okay, yeah,
/tabletop.
perfect. Yeah, so I will grab that. I'll just copy it for, I think it was really meant to Roy with it, it was posted on there. So I just posted it up. Oh, I just posted it to host and panelists. That doesn't help.
Awesome. And as a note, I know we're wrapping really quick here, but just letting you guys know, Courtney did put the link in there. I'm running a webinar in June that focuses on framework and CIS controls, if you guys want to just see a deeper dive into that. And again, our stuff is very agnostic and high level. So
excellent. We're just right at the top of the hour here with it, guys. This was fantastic. A lot of great comments in the chat. We will definitely have to do this again. I know you guys great partners with us here on these webinars and going forward. Brian, great to have you on this for the first time. I know it's old hat for Eddie, but brand new of having you, and you've added a lot to it. So thank you guys. I appreciate it here. Go to malwarebytes.com/MSP. A lot of great content that's out there, but also content around Malwarebytes. Excellent MSP program. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we'll be seeing you soon.
Thanks, Jeff. It was a blast. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.